Hello and good day, everyone. My name is Darlena Birch, MBA, RDN, and most importantly, public health dietitian. Welcome to my YouTube channel where I discuss U.S. federal nutrition programs, the important role they play in ensuring the health and well-being of all Americans, and how public health dietitians work tirelessly to support these amazing programs. So I know I promised to do a deep dive into the federal nutrition programs, and I want you to know that I absolutely still plan on doing this, but first, I want to discuss a topic that seems to be weighing heavily on the hearts of Americans everywhere, WIC participants included. First of all, I want to say how much I admire and respect WIC participants and their desire to advocate for themselves. You guys truly are amazing, and I am forever impressed by your tenacity and courage. So for today's episode, I'm going to discuss toxic metals in baby foods. On February 4th, 2021, Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, chairman of the Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy, released a staff report showing that baby foods are tainted with dangerous levels of toxic heavy metals that endanger infant neurological development and long-term brain function. Chairman Krishnamurthy issued the following statement: "Baby food manufacturers hold a special position of public trust, but consumers mistakenly believe that these companies would not sell unsafe products. The subcommittee staff report found that these manufacturers knowingly sell baby food containing high levels of toxic heavy metals. I hope companies will commit to making safer baby foods. Regardless, it's time that we develop much better standards for the sake of future generations." The subcommittee's investigation found that top baby foods are tainted with dangerous levels of inorganic arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury. Industry self-regulation fails to protect consumers as manufacturers set their own dangerously high internal standards for toxic heavy metal levels. Manufacturers routinely ignore internal standards and continue to sell products with higher heavy metal levels. And manufacturers' prevalent practice of only testing their ingredients is concealing higher levels of toxic metals in finished baby foods. The Food and Drug Administration and the World Health Organization have declared that inorganic arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury are toxic heavy metals dangerous to human health, particularly to babies and children who are most vulnerable to their neurotoxic effects. Even low levels of exposure can cause serious and often irreversible damage to brain development. The subcommittee's investigation revealed that manufacturers knowingly sell tainted baby food to unsuspecting parents in spite of internal company test results showing high levels of toxic heavy metal and without any warning labels whatsoever, added Chairman Krishnamurthy. "I look forward to FDA's careful regulation of these toxic heavy metals in baby foods, followed by strict compliance requirements and mandatory consumer labels." Now, what I just read came from the press release issued by the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. So now I want to discuss what the report itself actually says. Totaling 59 pages, I'll be sure to include the link to the report in the description box below. On November 6, 2019, following reports alleging high levels of toxic heavy metals in baby foods, the Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy requested internal documents and test results from 7 of the largest manufacturers of baby food in the United States, including both makers of organic and conventional products. You see, the concern regarding high levels of toxic heavy metals in baby foods actually dates back to October 2019, when an investigative report published by the advocacy group Healthy Babies, Bright Futures described an analysis regarding the presence of toxic heavy metals found in a range of infant foods. Rice-based products, sweet potatoes, and carrots, and fruit juices were found to pose the highest risk for neurotoxic harm. While some levels of arsenic in rice and juice were lower than a decade ago, exposure was still deemed to be too high. Now back to the subcommittee report. 4 of the companies, Nurture, Beechnut, Hain, and Gerber, responded to the subcommittee's requests. They produced their internal testing policies, test results for ingredients and/or finished products, and documentation about what the companies did with ingredients and/or finished products that exceeded their internal testing limits. Walmart, Campbell, and Sprout Organic Foods refused to cooperate with the subcommittee's investigation. The subcommittee was concerned that their lack of cooperation might be obscuring the presence of even higher levels of toxic heavy metals in their baby food products than their competitors' products. According to internal company documents and test results obtained by the subcommittee, commercial baby foods are tainted with significant levels of toxic heavy metals, including arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury. Exposure to toxic heavy metals causes permanent decreases in IQ, diminished future economic productivity, and increased risk of future criminal and antisocial behavior in children. Toxic heavy metals endanger infant neurological development and long-term brain function. Specifically, the subcommittee reports that arsenic was present in baby foods made by all responding companies, lead was present in baby foods made by all responding companies, cadmium was present in baby foods made by all responding companies, and mercury was detected in baby food of the only responding company that tested for it. I'm now going to transition to a conversation regarding heavy metals and why they're toxic to the human body. I'm sure most viewers are well aware of the fact that arsenic, lead, and mercury are bad for you. However, cadmium may be a toxic metal of which you're less less aware. And most importantly, I want to talk about the negative health consequences that these metals have on the human body. Metals are found naturally occurring in the Earth's crust. They are also released into our environment as pollution and get into the water and soil used to grow food. Metals can also get into food from food manufacturing and packaging. Some of the most common metals that get into food, according to FDA, include inorganic arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury. Arsenic is a natural element that can be found in rocks and soil, water, air, and in plants and animals. People can also be exposed to arsenic in the environment from some agricultural and industrial sources. Although it's sometimes found in its pure form as a steel gray metal, arsenic is usually part of chemical compounds. These compounds are divided into two groups: inorganic compounds, which are compounds found in industry, in building products, and in arsenic-contaminated water. This tends to be the more toxic form of arsenic and has been linked to cancer. And organic compounds. These compounds tend to be much less toxic than the inorganic arsenic compounds and are not thought to be linked to cancer. Organic compounds are found in some foods, such as fish and shellfish. Arsenic occurs naturally in the environment, and we normally take in small amounts in the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. People can also be exposed to arsenic in other ways, such as in man-made products. Now, page 10 of the subcommittee report states that arsenic is ranked number 1 among substances present in the environment that pose the most significant potential threat to human health, according to the Department of Health and Human Services Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. The known health risks of arsenic exposure include respiratory, gastrointestinal, hematological, hepatic, renal, skin, neurological, and immunological effects, as well as damaging effects on the central nervous system and cognitive development in children. Studies have concluded that arsenic exposure has a significant negative effect on neurodevelopment in children, and this negative effect is most pronounced in full-scale IQ, and more specifically in verbal and performance domains, as well as memory. For every 50% increase in arsenic levels, there is an approximately 0.4 decrease in the IQ of children. A study of Maine school children exposed to arsenic in drinking water found that children exposed to water with an arsenic concentration level greater than 5 parts per billion showed significant reductions in full-scale IQ, working memory, perceptual reasoning, and verbal comprehension scores. The authors pegged 5 parts per billion as an important threshold. Likewise, a study of children in Spain found that increasing arsenic exposure led to a decrease in the children's global motor, gross motor, and fine motor function scores. Boys in particular were more susceptible to arsenic's neurotoxicity. With regards to lead, it is a naturally occurring element found in small amounts in the Earth's crust. While it has some beneficial uses, it can be toxic to humans and animals, thereby causing health effects. Lead can be found in all parts of our environment: the air, the soil, the water, and even inside of our homes. Much of our exposure comes from human activities, including the use of fossil fuels, including past use of leaded gasoline, some types of industrial facilities, and past use of lead paint in homes. Lead and lead compounds have been used in a wide variety of products found in and around our homes, including paint, ceramics, pipes, and plumbing materials, solders, gasoline, batteries, ammunition, and cosmetics. Lead is particularly dangerous to children because their growing bodies absorb more lead than adults do, and their brains and nervous systems are more sensitive to the damaging effects of lead. Even low levels of lead in the blood of children can result in behavior and learning problems, lower IQ and hyperactivity, slow growth, hearing problems, and anemia. In rare cases, ingestion of lead can cause seizures, coma, and even death. With regards to pregnant women, lead can accumulate in the body over time, where it is stored in the bones along with calcium. During pregnancy, lead is released from the mother's bones along with calcium and can pass from the mother, exposing the fetus or the breastfeeding infant to lead. Page 11 of the subcommittee report states that lead is number 2 on ATSDR's list of substances present in the environment that pose the most significant potential threat to human health. Even small doses of lead exposure are hazardous, particularly to children. Lead is associated with a range of bad health outcomes, including behavioral problems, decreased cognitive performance, delayed puberty, and reduced postnatal growth. According to FDA, lead is especially dangerous to infants and young children. FDA acknowledges that high levels of lead exposure can seriously harm children's health and development, specifically the brain and nervous system. Neurological effects from high levels of lead exposure during early childhood include learning disabilities, behavior difficulties, and lowered IQ. Because lead can accumulate in the body, even low-level chronic exposure can be hazardous over time. Lead exposure severely affects academic achievement in children. Even at low levels, early childhood lead exposure has a negative impact on school performance. 2 separate studies of school children in Detroit and Chicago public schools found a strong inverse relationship between lead exposure and test scores. In the Detroit study, there was a significant association between early childhood exposure to lead and decreased standardized test performance, with lead exposure strongly linked to an adverse effect on academic achievement. The Chicago study found that higher blood lead concentrations were associated with lower reading and math scores in 3rd grade children. Increased blood concentration correlated with a 32% increase in risk of failing reading and math. The cognitive effects of early childhood lead exposure appear to be permanent. In one study, adults who previously had lead-associated development delays continued to show persistent cognitive deficits, demonstrating the long-lasting damage of lead exposure. Now, cadmium is a soft, malleable bluish-white metal found in zinc ores and, to a much lesser extent, in the cadmium mineral Luginaah I. Cadmium and its compounds are highly toxic, and exposure to this metal is known to cause cancer and targets the body's cardiovascular, renal, gastrointestinal, neurological, reproductive, and respiratory systems. Now, page 12 of the subcommittee report states that cadmium is number 7 on ATSDR's list of substances present in the environment that pose the most significant potential threat to human health. Cadmium is associated with decreases in IQ as well as the development of ADHD. A 2018 study found that cadmium exposure negatively affected children's full-scale IQ, particularly among boys. Boys exhibiting higher amounts of cadmium exposure had 7 fewer IQ points than those exhibiting less cadmium exposure. A 2015 study similarly found a significant inverse relationship between early cadmium exposure and IQ. A 2018 study linked cadmium exposure to ADHD, finding that the disorder was more common among children with the highest levels of cadmium exposure as compared to a control group. Now, with regards to mercury, it exists in various forms. There's elemental mercury and inorganic mercury, as well as organic mercury. These forms of mercury differ in their degree of toxicity and in their effects to the nervous, digestive, and immune systems, and on the lungs, kidneys, skin, and eyes. Mercury occurs naturally in the Earth's crust, and it's released into the environment from volcanic activity, weathering of rocks, and as a result of human activity. Human activity is the main cause of mercury release, particularly coal-fired power stations, residential coal burning for heating and cooking, industrial processes, waste incinerators, and as a result of mining for mercury, gold, and other metals. Now, page 12 through 13 of the subcommittee report states that mercury is number 3 on ATSDR's list of substances present in the environment that pose the most significant potential threat to human health. Studies of mercury's effects on childhood development have primarily been conducted by considering the mother's exposure to mercury while pregnant. In these substances, prenatal mercury exposure has been consistently associated with adverse subsequent neurodevelopment, and prenatal mercury exposure is also related to poorer estimated IQ. Beyond prenatal exposure, higher blood mercury levels at 2 and 3 years of age were positively associated with autistic behaviors among preschool-age children. The subcommittee report then goes on to list the various companies it tested and how much of the toxic metals appeared in their baby foods. The subcommittee report makes the following recommendations to address the issue of high levels of toxic metals found in baby foods. 1. Mandatory testing. Baby food manufacturers should be required by FDA to test their finished products for toxic heavy metals, not just their ingredients. 2. Labeling. Manufacturers should be required by FDA to report levels of toxic heavy metals on food labels. 3. Voluntary phase-out of toxic ingredients. Manufacturers should voluntarily find substitutes for ingredients that are high in toxic heavy metals, or phase out products that have high amounts of ingredients that frequently test high in toxic heavy metals, such as rice. 4. FDA standards. FDA should set maximum levels of toxic heavy metals permitted in baby foods. 1 level for each metal should apply across all baby foods, and the level should be set to protect babies against the neurological effects of toxic heavy metals. 5. Parental vigilance. Parents should avoid baby foods that contain ingredients testing high in toxic heavy metals, such as rice products. Instituting recommendations 1 through 4 will give parents the information they need to make informed decisions to protect their babies. The report goes on to call out FDA by stating that despite the well-known risk of harm to babies from toxic metals, FDA has not taken adequate steps to decrease their presence in baby foods. FDA has not issued thresholds for the vast majority of toxic heavy metals in baby foods and does not require warning labels on any baby food products. In the summer of 2019, FDA received a secret presentation from a baby food manufacturer that revealed the commercial process of preparing finished baby foods increases their levels of toxic heavy metals. For that manufacturer, which was identified as Hain, the process increased inorganic arsenic levels between 28 and 93%, yet FDA took no apparent action. In May 2017, FDA established the Toxic Elements Working Group with the goal of reducing exposure to toxic elements in food, cosmetics, and dietary supplements. FDA claims that the Toxic Elements Working Group is focused on metals because high levels of exposure to those metals are likely to have the most significant impact on public health and can be especially harmful to children because of concerns about the effects of their neurological development. But the working group has not resulted in new or stronger regulations to protect babies from toxic heavy metals in their food. In response, on February 16, 2021, FDA stated the following: FDA takes exposure to toxic elements in the food supply extremely seriously, especially when it comes to protecting the health and safety of the youngest and most vulnerable in the population. Toxic metals such as arsenic and lead are present in the environment and may enter the food supply through soil, water, or air. Because these elements occur in the environment, currently they cannot be completely avoided in the fruits, vegetables, or grains that are the basis of baby foods, juices, and infant cereals made by companies or by consumers who make their own foods. They also cannot be completely avoided by using organic farming practices. FDA's goal is to reduce exposure to toxic elements in foods to the greatest extent feasible and to further advance progress in this area through more research and enhanced collaboration among stakeholders. FDA then goes on to state that FDA regulations and monitoring helps to ensure the safety of baby foods sold or manufactured in the United States. FDA also states that when toxic elements in food present a potential health concern, they take steps to reduce levels, such as using science to set action levels, making data public, and working with industry on identifying effective mitigation strategies. FDA also states that they provide consumers with actionable advice to limit exposure to toxic elements from food. So while the House Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy on Oversight and Reform works things out with the FDA, what are things that you and I can do as everyday Americans to protect the health of our infants? Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics states that the low levels of heavy metals found in baby foods likely are a relatively small part of the child's overall heavy metal exposure risk. However, exposure from all sources should be minimized. Heavy metal exposure can be harmful to the developing brain, and it's been linked with problems with learning, cognition, and behavior. But keep in mind that many genetic, social, and environmental factors influence healthy brain development, and heavy metal exposure is just one of these factors. Stronger rules and regulations for testing and limiting the amount of heavy metals in foods for babies and toddlers are most important. But there are several steps that parents can take now to reduce the risk that kids will be exposed to heavy metals in their diet and from other sources. Recommendations from AAP include serving a variety of foods. Give your child a well-balanced diet that includes a variety of fruits, vegetables, grains, and lean protein. Eating a variety of healthy foods that are rich in essential nutrients can lower the exposure to metals and other contaminants found in some foods. Reading the labels. Multi-ingredient baby food blends may be a good option. Be aware that many have the same first or second ingredient though. Different flavor blends like kale/pear and spinach/pumpkin, for example, may actually have both sweet potatoes as their first ingredient. It's important to read the ingredients labels to be sure you are offering a true variety of foods. Switching up your grains. Fortified infant cereals can be a good source of nutrition for babies, but rice cereal does not need to be the first or only cereal used. Rice tends to absorb more arsenic from groundwater than other crops. You can include a variety of grains in your baby's diet, including oat, barley, couscous, quinoa, farro, and bulgur. Multigrain infant cereals can be a good choice, and try to avoid using rice milk and brown rice syrup, which is sometimes used as a sweetener in processed toddler foods. You can also check your water. Heavy metals can get into the tap water. For example, arsenic can contaminate well water, and older pipes may contain lead. You can contact your local health department to have your water tested if this is a concern. Breastfeeding rather than formula feeding can also help reduce exposure to metals. AEP recommends that breastfeeding be the sole source of nutrition for your baby for about the first 6 months. Offer toddlers and young children sliced or pureed whole fruits rather than juice. Some fruit juices can contain concerning levels of heavy metals, plus juice is high in sugar and not as nutrient-rich as whole fruit, so stick with breast milk or formula for babies under 6 months old and water and milk after they reach age 1. Make healthy fish choices. Some types of fish can be high in a form of mercury called methylmercury and other metals. Consider homemade baby food. There are several benefits to making your own food fresh at home. It can be cost-effective, avoids potential contaminants from processing or packaging, and you can choose the ingredients. And address lead hazards in your home. There are important ways to help reduce your baby's exposure to heavy metals, and the most common source of lead exposure, for example, is actually from peeling or chipping paint in older homes. Soil, some cosmetics, and spices, water, and certain occupations and hobbies can also be sources of exposure. Also, don't smoke or vape. Secondhand and third-hand smoke from both regular and e-cigarettes may expose children to metals such as cadmium and lead. Vaping allows heavy metals from the vape coils to get into the air and can be inhaled. Secondhand smoke also contains harmful chemicals that can increase the risk of cancer. Now, organic foods may have lower levels of certain pesticides and other chemicals. However, because heavy metals are found in the soil, organic foods often contain similar levels as non-organic foods. Now, until more information about metals in baby foods becomes available, experts say there's no need to get your child tested. Tests that look at a child's hair for metal exposure also are not recommended, since this type of testing is scientifically unproven and often inaccurate. Lastly, talk with your pediatrician. If you're concerned about metal exposure in your child, talk with your pediatrician. Your regional pediatric environmental health specialty unit has staff who can talk with parents about concerns over environmental toxins. And lastly, advocate for yourself. Contact your legislators and let them know you have concerns over the high levels of toxic metals found in baby foods. Thank you for joining me today. If you like what you see, then please smash the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, you are your own best advocate. Feed your body well, nourish your soul, nurture your mind, and nutrify your spirit. Remain true to yourself and never forget that every second forward is another opportunity to be a better version of your past self.